Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event this evening. My name is Kambiz Ranavardi. I'm a board member for ColumbiaDC and a graduate of the School of Engineering and Applied Science. We are very privileged to have Lance Grande, the Emeritus Negaunee Distinguished Service Curator at the famed Field Museum of Natural and Cultural History in Chicago, to talk to us about the evolution of religions, history of related traditions. And this is the title of Lance's most recent book, published by Columbia University Press. You can find the link to the book, very exciting book, on our website. Also, it is on our reminder, and if you haven't seen it, we will send it again with a discount code, so be on the lookout for that, and with a link to the recording of this session within the next 24 hours. As for a very quick introduction, Lance specializes in evolutionary systematics, paleontology, and biology, and his focus area is in the interdisciplinary application of scientific method and philosophy. There's many exciting books, among them Curators, Behind the Scenes of Natural History Museums, published in 2017, and The Lost World of Fossil Lake, Snapshots from Deep Time, published in 2013. So welcome, Lance. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Kambiz. I've been a research scientist at the Field Museum in Chicago for more than 40 years. One of the things I've always loved about working at a major museum is the opportunity to do interdisciplinary research. My PhD is in biology, but I was hired by a geology department. The zoologists at my museum combine their anatomical work with environmentalism. The museum's anthropology department works with the biology department's DNA lab, and these are just to name a few of the collaborative programs that exist there. Such interdisciplinary perspectives often lead to original, far-reaching insight about the world that we live in. Interdisciplinary work is in some ways easier in a major museum than it is in a university. If I worked for a university, I might have to trek clear across campus to visit colleagues, collections, and facilities of other departments. At the Field Museum, we're all in one building, listening to each other's seminars and sometimes collaborating in each other's research projects. In the latter years of my career, I've tried to push the envelope of my research into new interdisciplinary directions in order to reach broader audiences outside of my academic comfort zone. And this brings me to the subject of my talk today, which is in conjunction with my newest book. Over the last 4 years, I've attempted to bring my experience with evolutionary theory and philosophy into the social sciences for the study of cultural history. So years ago, I became fascinated with how many social scientists rejected not only evolutionism, but comparativism as well. And here we can see the famous University of Chicago Divinity School professor, J.Z. Smith, quoted as saying, "Comparison is over." As a comparative systematist interested in deep history and evolution, I was intrigued. I noted a movement by linguists to bring comparativism and evolutionism back into the social sciences. And here we see a tree of Indo-European languages by one of these groups. I decided to try this with an aspect of human culture which has resisted comparativism and evolutionary philosophy for more than a century, and that is religion. My content for objectivity is agnostic, with no conscious preconception about which belief system, if any, is true to the exclusion of others. Several years of focused research on this subject resulted in a 688-page book that Kambiz mentioned. That's being published by Columbia University Press. And today I'm only going to give you a very brief synopsis of it. Religions comprise one of the most complex, socially ingrained aspects of human culture. Broader understanding of their historical interrelationships may be critical for the future survival of our species. This will be controversial within the social sciences and within conservative theological organizations. But in today's world of over 8 billion people, there's too much religiously enhanced conflict, hindering us from collectively addressing major global challenges. So there are 3 parts to my presentation today. First, I'll discuss the concept of using comparativism and evolutionary theory to study human culture. Second, I'll show some resulting hypothetical trees of diversification among organized religions. And third, I'll discuss some general trends suggested by this study and what they mean for the future of our species. So the first part, applying modern evolutionary theory and comparativism to the study of human culture. Comparativism is not a replacement for specialization. It is instead a necessary partner to it. Specialization plus comparativism equals a broad perspective. In science, there must be a collaboration between specialists and comparativists. Here I am, a systematic comparativist, relying on the work of many specialists from the social sciences. I agree with E.O. Wilson on where we are in the modern information age. And his quote is, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world henceforth will be run by synthesizers, people able to put together the right information at the right time, think critical about it, and make important choices wisely." I'll start with a traditional metaphorical tool used to express hypotheses of relationship, the tree. This tree simply says B and C are more closely related to each other than either is to A, period. It has no implication of superiority or inferiority. Modern evolutionary analysis uses unweighted shared characters to build hypothetical trees of relationship. Here, for example, we see a data matrix on the left with 4 characters, 1, 2, 3, and 4, for groups A, B, and C. And you'll note that B and C uniquely share characters 2, 3, and 4. Now, statistically, this indicates a hypothetical tree pattern, with B and C being closer to each other than either to A. This can be explained by evolutionary process theory, with B and C having a younger common ancestor, Y, than an older common ancestor, X, to A, B, and C. Just as we apply these techniques to aspects of nature, such as animals, we can apply them to aspects of culture, such as religions. Vertebrate animals, for example, we could take a robin, a sparrow, and a frog. The robin and the sparrow share many characteristics not also shared by the frog, such as feathers, wing structure, beaks, and many other. Similarly, Catholics and Protestants share many characteristics that are not also shared by Orthodox Judaism. I mean, these might include the New Testament, Jesus as Messiah, 12 apostles, and on and on. There are many characters that allow you to make trees just based on characters alone. But in some ways, the study of evolution is easier in culture than biology, because the analysis of major biological diversification is almost exclusively reliant on character analysis, like the last slide, whereas the analysis of cultural diversification also has contemporaneous written records of schisms or diversification and founders, the ideological ancestors. So getting back to trees, Charles Darwin began using evolutionary trees to illustrate biological diversity by at least 1837. And here we see page 36 out of his notebook B, where he has a tree showing D, B, and C more closely related to each other than any is to A. Seems simple enough. Where did it all go wrong with the social sciences? The main problem was colonialist progressionism. In the 19th century, there were people that came up with progressive ladders, which included lower humans going to higher humans, and chauvinistic trees used to rationalize cultural superiority. Here's a page from Haeckel's 1876 book showing what he thought was a human pedigree he interpreted as showing cultural superiority for some races over others. English anthropologist Herbert Spencer was another progressionist from the 19th century and founder of what became known as social Darwinism. His famous line is survival of the fittest. Progressionist initiatives led to inhumane ends by the late 19th, early 20th centuries as biased attempts to supposedly, quote, improve human society, unquote, ranging from eugenics to genocide. Early backlash to the progressionist approach was the rejection of cultural evolutionism and even comparativism by most of the social sciences. Here's the very first curator at the Field Museum where I work, Franz Boas. He was also founder of the anti-comparativist school called historical particularism. However, in the biological sciences, by the mid-20th century, progressionism was completely abandoned in favor of treating evolution simply as diversification over time. Rather than searching for a ladder of progress, evolutionary biology became a search for historical relationships among putative groups. This transition remains to be fully appreciated within much of the social sciences. Some social scientists also claim that culture is too complex to understand in evolutionary terms. Well, while culture is complex, it is no more complex than nature, and we can take steps to simplify historical studies of it. And the first step has to do with focus. Anthropologist Gary Feynman once wrote, aspects of culture must be decoupled to decipher evolutionary history. And that's true for cultural history, just as it is for natural history. We need to focus on one aspect at a time. In natural history, some people study the evolution of animals, others plants, some ecosystems, some continental drift. And similarly, with cultural history, we have to study religion or medicine or farming or politics as separate entities, even though we can look for similarities afterwards. So for my cultural study, the focus that I chose was religion. Now we come to the second part of my presentation, to define religion, and organized religion in particular, and show a few hypothetical trees of its historical diversification. Religion is a complex tree with many interconnected kinds or traditions. So the first basic question is, how do we define it? There are many different ways in which historians have tried to define religion. Some include only traditions of deity worship. Others include all supernatural belief traditions. I use the latter, less biased definition here. Another basic question is, well, what constitutes a kind of religion? Kinds in the social sciences are called comparons, and kinds in the biological sciences are called taxa. Both types of kinds are simply hypothetical group samples of diversity. And the way you do this is still a question today. Here, for example, we have two recent books, including Freiberger's 2021 book on cultural comparons and Mischler's 2021 book on trying to figure out what, if anything, are species. Religion is an aspect of particular interest to us because of its immense impact on the cultural history of our species. Early in human history, religion promoted social cohesion by enhancing empathic, altruistic, and charitable behaviors. It also enhanced the early growth of literacy, music, and art. It was also responsible for early development of higher education and for most of medicine and healing prior to the 20th century. However, religion also has a darker side. It's often been used to inflame deep intercultural chauvinism, conquest, and tribalistic conflict. Tribalistic conflict today is impeding our ability to collectively address global challenges, and there are many of them. A broader, more pluralistic understanding of religions, as well as other aspects of culture, could enhance our ability to deal with these challenges. Today, I present a very simplified look at the diversity of traditions. I won't spend much time explaining specific trees that I'll show you today. And some of these trees you'll see have a lot of smaller branches that I'm not going to have time to explain, but my book covers all of this in much greater detail. My focus is on organized religion, meaning religions that are codified, having rules and codes, and institutionalized, or having established traditions. All of the trees I'll show you here today interconnect with each other at one level or another. Prior to 9000 BCE, organized religion began to diversify already along two major branches, Eastern and Western. I'll begin with the Eastern branch, and Asian cyclicism. Asian cyclicism has many major branches with hundreds, perhaps thousands of sub-branches. Its earliest records are from India. Here we have an 11,000-year-old artifact from the Baghar I site in India, thought to represent early Asian cyclicism. Some general characters of Asian cyclicism are seeing time as cyclic rather than linear, with samsara, reincarnation, transmigration, yin-yang, kalak chakra, or other cycles of existence. 2, employing mind-body meditative physical practices, such as mantras, yoga, zazen, tai chi, simran, gikon. And 3, emphasizing orthopraxy, which means correct ethical conduct, rather than orthodoxy, which means adherence to scriptural dogmatic practices. Early in its history, Asian cyclicism divided between Taoic religion in the Far East and the earlier Dharmic religion beginning in India. The largest branch of Dharmic religion is Hinduism, which includes 60% of all Asian cyclicism today. Its great expansion came under the Gupta Empire in the 4th through 6th century CE. And here we see an artifact of the Hindu deity Pashupati from the 24th century BCE. Hinduism had already started to diversify by at least the 17th century BCE, and it diversified profusely from then on. Buddhism is another branch of Dharmic religion. Today, it includes approximately 37% of all Asian cyclicism. Its early expansion was facilitated by the Indian Emperor Ashoka the Great in the 3rd century BCE. And here we see a statue of Siddhartha Gautama, founder of Buddhism in the 5th century BCE, otherwise known as the Buddha. By the end of the 1st century BCE, Buddhism had diversified extensively, and this is mostly after data from Buswell and Lopez. Jainism was another branch of Dharmic religion. It is a sister group to Buddhism, but includes only 0.4% of Asian cyclicism. It never had much imperial support through history, which might explain the few number of adherents that it has today. And here we see a statue of Mahavir, the supreme preacher of Jainism from the 6th century BCE. Jainism was never as large as Buddhism, but it similarly diversified into many sub-branches. Sikhism is another branch of Dharmic religion. It's a relatively recent branch from the 15th century CE, containing less than 1% of Asian cyclicism, but it has 8 major sub-branches today, mostly in India. And here we see a 19th century painting of Guru Nanak from the 15th century, founder of Sikhism. Taoic religion is a non-dharmic branch of Asian cyclicism. It developed in Southeast Asia, forming Taoism and Confucianism in China and Shintoism in Japan. The deities of Shintoism are referred to as kami, and they enhanced imperial power. Here we see a portrait of Emperor Jimmu, the figurative godly ancestor to all succeeding emperors. In Japan, all emperors were treated as godlike descendants of Shinto kami until the end of World War II. This generated fierce loyalty to the emperor during the war, such as the kamikazes. Shortly after Japan's surrender in 1945, the emperor signed the Humanity Declaration, admitting that he was not a deity. And here we have a picture of Emperor Hirohito, who signed that document. The numerous sub-branches of Taoic religion collectively make up 2% of all Asian cyclicism. Getting back to the earlier organized religion, the sister group to Eastern organized religion and Asian cyclicism is Western organized religion, beginning with Old World hard polytheism. Old World hard polytheism developed before 9000 BCE in the Old World, later spreading to the Americas, first through Siberia. Hard polytheism is the belief in many independent deities, and each branch of hard polytheism had its own pantheon or group of gods. And there were hundreds, again, perhaps thousands of different branches over time. Here we see a few examples of some of the gods. Ninurta from the Mesopotamian pantheon, the Egyptian Osiris and Isis, or the Celtic Cernunnos, or Thor from the Old Norse pantheon, or the Greek Zeus. Many pharaohs, emperors, and kings claimed to be part of the pantheon themselves in order to enhance their power and influence. For example, here we see Ramses II, the Egyptian pharaoh from 1279 to 1213 BCE, and Octavian Augustus, the Roman Empire from 27 BCE to 14 CE. Both claimed to be gods and part of the pantheon, which greatly increased their power and influence. Early polytheistic beliefs spread from the Old World to the New World, or the Americas, along with the first humans to arrive there more than 20,000 years ago. Here we have, you can see 21,000-year-old fossilized human footprints from New Mexico. Between 30,000 and 11,000 years ago, the Old World was connected to the New World by an enormous land bridge called Beringia, which allowed human migration. And you can see this at the top map there, between Siberia and the Alaskan region. This was cut off approximately 11,000 years ago when rising sea levels permanently submerged Beringia under what's now the Bering Strait. And you can see that in the map below with current day geography. Once the Beringian land bridge was gone, polytheism in the New World evolved independently from that in the Old World for thousands of years. It's a phenomenon that biologists sometimes refer to as allopatry, where population gets split, cut off from each other, and then evolves independently. Here we see a couple examples of shared characteristics between Siberian and Western Alaskan. And these are totem poles. So New World polytheism flourished and diversified over the millennia until the late 15th century CE. But after 1492, it was rapidly overtaken by Western Christian conquest from Europe. It's estimated that approximately 90% of all indigenous American population was wiped out during the first few centuries of the Spanish conquest. During that same period, over 1 million Spaniards emigrated to the Americas, calling it New Spain. Eventually, even records of many indigenous New World religions, especially North American, were lost or unrecognizably altered by Spanish conquistadors, Christian chroniclers, and the later indoctrinating residential schools. Here we see a portrait, for example, Cortés, 1521, defeat of the Aztec Empire for Catholic Spain. And on the right, is a black and white photograph from 1890 at one of the residential schools in Quebec, which was for the assimilation of Inuit children into the Anglo-American Christian culture. Going back to early Western organized religion, the sister group to Old World hard polytheism is linear monotheism. This developed in the Middle East by the 14th century BCE with the reduction of the pantheon to a single god. The god of linear monotheism went by many different names, but he was generally not female. He was Aten of Atenism, Ahura Mazda of Zoroastrianism, and El, Yahweh, Jehovah, Monad, or Allah of Abrahamic monotheism. Some general characters of linear monotheism are having linear rather than cyclic views, one birth, one life, one death, and an eternal afterlife. Or two, having a strong dualistic cosmology, good versus evil, light versus dark, heaven versus hell. And three, being actively proselytic, historically with forceful conversion efforts and persecution of unconverted rival traditions at times. The largest branch of linear monotheism is Abrahamic monotheism, which originated in the 6th century BCE, beginning with Second Temple Judaism and Samaritanism. Its followers share the belief in only one God and a series of prophets that include Noah, Abraham, and Moses. It includes 60% of all religious people today. Early Abrahamic monotheism developed sacred scripture called Tanakh during the 6th century BCE. The Tanakh not only served as a Hebrew Bible, it later influenced the development of the Gospel of 12 for Ebionism, the Old Testament for Christianity, the codices for biblical demiurgism, and the Quran for Islam. Those four branches comprise what I call Jesu venerationism. Jesu venerationism, as used in my book, is a major branch of Abrahamic monotheism that developed in the 1st century CE. It formed around a man named Jesus, who was venerated at various levels, ranging from Jewish rabbi to prophet to divine aspect of God, depending on which sub-branch you're talking about. Here we have an early depiction of Jesus from 232 CE, Syria. Jesu venerationism diversified into Ebionism, traditional Christianity, and biblical demiurgism during the 1st century CE, and later into Islam during the 7th century. Ebionism was a short-lived movement that followed Jewish law and revered Jesus as a prophet. However, it saw him as a mere man with human parents. Ebionites were subsequently deemed as heretics by both traditional Christianity and Pharisaic Judaism. Ebionites were widely persecuted and largely driven to extinction by the late 7th century. Traditional Christianity saw Jesus as Son of God. It became the largest branch of Jesu venerationism, thanks in part to its early symbiotic alliance with the Roman Empire. In 313 CE, the empire legalized Christianity. Then in 380 CE, it outlawed hard polytheism altogether and made Christianity the empire state religion. And here we see a map of the Roman Empire during the late 4th century CE, covering much of the Old World. By the 16th century, major schisms developed within Christianity, resulting in the Reformation, which formed Protestantism and Anglicanism, both as contentious splits from Roman Catholicism. Protestantism began in Germany in 1517 with Lutheranism and Martin Luther's 95 Theses, rejecting the Roman Catholic Pope. Anglicanism, also known as Anglican Protestantism, began with King Henry VIII. His 1534 Act of Supremacy declared himself as head of the English Christian Church rather than the Pope in Rome. Biblical demiurgism was another early branch of Jesu venerationism, forming in the 1st century CE. It eventually lost its early violent competition with traditional Christianity. Biblical demiurgists were binatarians, believing in a primal good God, or the monad, and an evil creator spirit they called the demiurge. They saw Jesus as spiritual emanation from the monad. They were increasingly persecuted by the inquisitors and crusaders of traditional Christianity. By the late 14th century, they had been driven basically to extinction. Here we see a biblical demiurgist version of Jesus on a portrait from the 14th century in China. Islam is another branch of Jesu-venerationism. It developed in Arabia with its prophet Muhammad. Here we have a 16th century portrait of Muhammad riding the steed Buraq into heaven. And as you can see, his face is whited out here. It is considered a fierce offense to actually depict Muhammad's face in art. Islam's followers revered 25 prophets from Adam to Jesus and ending with Muhammad. And here you can see this chart with the 25 consecutive prophets of Islam according to the Quran. You can see starting with Adam on the bottom and going all the way up to Jesus as the penultimate prophet, and then finally Muhammad as the final prophet. Islam is the second largest religion today, just behind traditional Christianity. And interestingly, its rate of increase today is greater than that of traditional Christianity. The early success of Islam was enhanced by collaboration with large Muslim caliphates in the 7th and 8th centuries CE. And here we see a map of the expansion of Islamic caliphates from 632 to 750 CE. And you can see, again, they covered a huge area of the old world during this time. So, organized religions in summary. As mentioned earlier, all trees in this study can be interconnected into a single tree. The names in blue on this tree were all expanded into trees of their own in some of the previous slides that I've shown you. Religion is one of the most ingrained and widespread aspects of human culture. There are over 10,000 different sub-branches of organized religion that are practiced today, most of which are sub-branches of those that I showed you today. Many more than that have gone extinct over the years. Only about 2% of people in 2010 self-identified as atheists, according to the Pew Research Center. Major beliefs to which people self-identified in 2010 in a study by Johnson and Grimm for Pew Research: traditional Christianity with 32.8%, Islam 22.5%, Asian cyclicism, consisting mostly of Buddhism and Hinduism, at 22.4%, traditional Judaism as 0.2%, and then other religions not differentiated here because it's not clear what differentiates them, such as Chinese folk religion and other things that are sort of identified with vernacular names. Those amount to about 10.3%, and agnosticism 9.8%, and finally atheism at 2%. So this brings us to the last and third part of my presentation, to show a few trends apparent from this study and comment on their relevance to the future of our species. Based on my study, I can make 4 general observations and end with a recommendation for the future of our species. First general observation: most or all organized religions were historically related at one ideological level or another. If you go back far enough, they connect with some aspect of their system. Detailed hypotheses of their interrelationships can be unambiguously illustrated with trees like the one I've shown you today. The second general observation: the largest major branches of organized religion today were historically intertwined with major political powers, or a form of cultural symbiosis. Traditional Christianity, for example, with the Roman Empire, Islam with the medieval caliphates, Hinduism with the Gupta Empire, and Buddhism with the Mauryan Empire. These are the four largest major branches of religion today. The largest major organized religion by country in each country today is shown on this map. Again, a Pew Research study. The blue shows those countries where Christianity is the most major religion. The yellow shows those countries where Islam is the largest religion. And then the green, dark and light, indicate Hinduism and Buddhism as the largest religions in those countries. So a third general observation from this study: the authority of women in organized religion historically declined with the rise of male-dominated pantheons, empires, clergies, and caliphates. And the fourth general observation: religion played a role in our species' early ability to adapt to its social and physical environment, as noted by Emil Durkheim, one of the architects of modern social sciences, here in his book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. The tribalistic aspect of religion was a competitive advantage for early humans when there are only a couple 100 million people on the planet. Communal societies that developed agriculture, commerce, educational facilities, and armies outcompeted less communitarian groups. However, the social and physical environment for the human species has significantly changed in today's interconnected, densely crowded, and technologically advanced world. Chauvinistic intercultural tribalism has increasingly become a maladaptive trait for our species. The human population is over 8 billion people today, much of which is in long-standing intercultural conflict, often enhanced by religious differences. Hindu versus Buddhist, Jew versus Muslim, Muslim versus Christian, Protestant versus Catholic, Hindu versus Muslim, Sunni versus Shia, religious versus atheist, and on and on. Ruling powers and subversive organizations still use such passionate conflict to demonize cultural opponents and help justify targeted violence. Increasingly, these conflicts are technologically escalated by hyper-partisan media, strategically designed to incite people's tribalistic impulses. Tribalistic conflict now interferes with our ability to collectively solve global challenges, such as climate change, population growth, pandemics, armed conflict, and devastating regional poverty. We as a species need to better adapt to our increasingly challenged social environment, or else we risk expediting our own extinction. Broader understanding and tolerance of cultural diversity is critical because cultural diversification over time is an inevitable, never-ending part of human existence. I'll simply end here with a quote from the late 20th century French environmentalist and social evolutionist, René Dubos. Human diversity makes tolerance more than a virtue. It makes it a requirement for survival. And for much more on this complex subject, and it is complex, I hope you will look for my book. It's available by January 2024, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And thank you all for listening today.
All right, thank you so much for that overview. So we have a good-sized audience today. If you are listening to the talk and you have any questions, please go ahead and write your into the Q&A box, and we'll go ahead and ask them to Lance. My name is Miyako Yerrick, and I'm the club administrator for the ColumbiaDC Alumni Club. So we have a few questions already coming in. And I think I want to start with this one, which we got about halfway through your talk. And somebody says, just like evolution, are there certain attributes that make a certain religion adept at surviving and thriving through history, while some stay limited in their following and reach?
Well, the most major thing that I found at least for the largest major religions turned out to be this symbiotic relationship with empires. I mean, again, we had the Roman Empire and Christianity. We had the caliphates with Islam, and we had these things were very powerful. As far as innate traits of a particular belief system, I think that's much more difficult to specify. I mean, certainly there are some religions that were suicidal and obviously not going to be helpful. But most major religions have their qualities and their components that are not so good. It depends on how people. It often depends on how people use religions. It's not just the ideologies themselves. Religion is such a tempting thing for power to use because it's so impactful with humans. And that's something that is such a thing we have to be careful of these days. I mean, look around you in the world today. What's going on? I mean, it's something that we have to get a better handle on going forward and find a way to be more collaborative. I mean, we have to recognize that the entire human species is our tribe, not just your particular religion or your particular culture.
And you talked a lot about kind of the tribalistic aspect of religion and how it's shifted into this tribalistic conflict, and how before there was a symbiotic relationship with empires and religion. Do you see now a similar relationship between religions in different political parties, kind of further right or further left, not just in the US, but globally, since I wouldn't say there's necessarily an empire like the Roman Empire right now. So how are religions kind of partnering with different groups? And I guess the one I see most would be political parties.
Yeah, that's a really complex question because, of course, this partnership takes many different forms. As I said, often powers that don't even adhere to a particular religion will sometimes identify it as something they can use as a tool to increase their power base. It's really something that is deserving of much greater study, in-depth study. But I think one of the first things we have to do is just identify what those different forms of religion are and what their interrelationships are. So then we have a better handle on how to compare one to another. Are we looking at a religion sometimes, or are we looking at a political group that is kind of taken a religion and claimed it as their own?
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can take a step back now. We have a question, all the way back, kind of, what is your definition of religion or of a religion?
My definition is very general. I would classify all supernatural belief systems as one form of religion or another, just to make it, say, as general as possible. Because again, if we really want to study the broadest context of this, we really need to be open to, say, different beliefs that we're totally unfamiliar with or are foreign to us. We can't assume that, for example, I mean, some people assume that religion is a very specific thing. Sometimes just their religion is the only religion they recognize. But again, that sort of chauvinistic look at religion is not helpful, I think.
And one of the questions is on atheism specifically. I know you had it in the chart of which religion people identify with, and 2% were atheists in 2010. Do you consider atheism a religion?
No. I define religion in my study as supernatural belief systems, and since there's no supernatural component to atheism, I don't. But I include it in that chart because, again, it shows that how widespread religious belief systems are still on the planet. 98%.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and that was
sorry.
That was in 2010.
Right.
I thought I had read that it's a lot more atheist and agnostic now than it had been a decade ago. Is that something that you've seen?
It's really hard to tell because that was such an immense study in 2010.
Yeah.
I don't think they duplicated the scale of that again. And so they would have to probably do something equivalent to the Pew study in 2010 to have a comparable measure of that.
I see. And do you have any idea on kind of in earlier centuries what that breakdown would have looked like?
In earlier centuries, that's really hard. You know, one of the problems you have is so many of our records about religion from the earlier centuries were written by people who were basically trying to eliminate a particular religion, or at least not put it in a favorable light. I mean, a lot of the information that we have on early forms of polytheism, for example, were written by the Christian chroniclers, who were basically demonstrating that these things were really bad, and this was not the way that you were going to achieve heaven. So it's hard, and I think what I'm trying to lay out is kind of a template, because I'm hoping now that I'm a generalist here, and I'm hoping now that some specialists will take advantage of this and look at some of these trees and try and develop them further and flesh out the characteristics more. And once that's done, we'll be able to better answer questions like that one that you just asked.
So we have a couple of questions on kind of the driver or the cause of the schisms and the breaks. So somebody asks if it's driven by a person, or somebody else asks if it's driven by violence.
Well, it's usually starts with a person or a group. Violence comes later when one branch of a schism is trying to dominate over another. So there are two completely different processes here. I mean, diversification doesn't necessarily have to be violent. Diversification is just diversification. The violence comes when one branch becomes entirely chauvinistic in their views and decides that they need to convert the others by their own will or not. So yeah, again, it's complex. You have the religion.
Right. These are not easy questions here that we're having our audience ask.
You have the religion, and then you have the way people use religion, and there are two.
Okay, so here's a question on what caused the development of monotheism from polytheism.
Well, it looked like it over time. It just kind of led in that direction. I mean, early on there were these huge pantheons with lots of gods and no particularly one in charge. Eventually, you had supreme gods being designated within pantheons, and then eventually, in Egypt, you had Atonism, where if a pharaoh decided to just have only one God. And that idea didn't last very long for Atenism, but then later on it was tried again with Zoroastrianism, and there are still Zoroastrians today. But then, of course, when Abrahamic religion rose up, that was the major one. Again, Abrahamic religion just took off because, I mean, basically today you have Christianity and Islam, both of them Abrahamic religions that include much of the world's population today.
So we have a question from Marianne on the recording and the slides. So we are recording the event, and we'll send it out tomorrow to our link to our YouTube channel. And if, Professor Grande, if you share the slides or any kind of additional information, we can include that when we send out the link.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna that one. So now we have one from Manny, and he asks, what did each empire expect to gain by establishing the religions? For example, what did the Roman Empire plan to gain by establishing Christianity? What was their goal?
Well, the Romans early on were polytheists, and they had many, many different gods. And when Christianity came along, some of the emperors got the idea that, well, I want to be a supreme ruler in this area, and monotheism has a supreme God that looks like a good idea. I could emulate here, more or less. If they could have a single God and claim some sort of connection there, that sort of enhanced their own position. I mean, that again, that's an assumption based on whatever records there are, and it's a good question. But it seems to me that consolidating power is something that the Roman Empire did, and it's also something that monotheism did.
This is a question from Eugene. He says, can you see any parallel between polytheism and monotheism with democracies versus autocracies? He says, one thinks of the history of Rome and the current apparent trend towards autocratic governments at this point in history.
Wow, well, that's an interesting question. And that would be one for the specialists. Because, it's, again, they're two different things. And it's often that one aspect will influence another aspect. I mean, it's not unlike in natural history. I mean, the evolution of the continents affect the evolution of animals, okay? Mm-hmm. So in the social sciences, the evolution of politics is certainly affected by the evolution of religions, and but fleshing out the details of that is something for a specialist.
Okay, one of our earlier questions was if you can explain the root and the importance of the Messiah or Savior that apparently all the big three religions have adopted, who will come to spread justice at the expense of others.
So what is the question?
The root and the importance of the Messiah or the Savior, kind of at that the three religions have.
What is that root?
Yeah, if you can explain the root and the importance of the Messiah.
Well, again, it's his existence that is the character. And the importance is a subjective term that it doesn't necessarily have a bearing on making these trees or looking at the relationships. The fact that if we're talking about Jesus as Messiah, that was something that certainly was a shared characteristic of all of traditional Christianity. That same person was recognized in different ways by other groups outside of Christianity. So this particular person can be a character at different levels depending on how he's recognized, whether he's recognized as a a rabbi or as a prophet or as a Messiah. And those are all different beliefs about a single person. So again, it's a complex thing. And defining the characters in an unambiguous way is one of the jobs for the specialists. They are going to have to come and be less ambiguous about how they talk about these things. If we really want to know how all of these belief systems are related historically.
So we have a question from Barbara who said, if you look at a part of the chart kind of earlier in the time frame, can you talk about where the information came from that you were then able to sort the relationships between the different religions?
Which chart? You mean which tree, you mean?
Yeah, just in one of the trees, kind of, where were you getting your information from?
It depends on which tree you're talking about, because each tree is
like,
I mean, each tree has information from different specialists who were studying that particular branch of religion. So, you know, there are specialists that study Hinduism, there's specialists that study traditional Christianity, and, you know, they're the ones that study the details of that. And but they're different in each case. I mean, as I say, I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist in any particular one of these. My job is simply taking information from many different people and trying to put it together in some sort of consistent framework. That's what's lacking. Because again, in the social sciences, this resistance to comparativism that developed in the late 19th century, that has compartmentalized some of these studies so much that we can't evaluate things like that, like comparing how a particular founder was seen across the board. I mean, it's just, it's a very complex thing.
So we have a question on if you discovered any religions that you don't think obviously connect to earlier movements. And if so, what are your thoughts on explaining their development? And a separate, maybe completely separate question, so you can tell me if I'm totally off, but there's a question on where does Scientology fit into all of this?
Yes. Well, you know, nowadays it's impossible to find a religion that doesn't connect to something else, because nobody is immune from ever having been exposed to some idea about religion. It is, I would say, if there were startup religions that developed independently, you'd have to go way back in time. And certainly I would suspect that in regions of South, East, and Western Africa, for example, there would be places where, you know, millennia ago, religions developed independently. But that would have been a long time ago. The world is so interconnected nowadays that it's hard to imagine a culture that would be insulated from any knowledge of prior belief systems.
Okay.
I mean, even the notion that there's a good place and a bad place, that wasn't always part of religion. But it's a general enough concept where it's been adopted, you know, by, you know, pretty much all modern religions. Yeah, teasing independent derivations of religion, I believe you'd have to go way back in time.
Okay, so first, if you could describe, or you have described polytheism as hard, can you explain the adjective hard there? And then I'll have a follow-up question.
Sure. Polytheism is often divided into two types: hard polytheism and soft polytheism. Hard polytheism is each deity is an independent god, whereas soft polytheism is a god that has different forms, such as Trinitarianism, Christianity. They recognize a God, but they also recognize a Father, a Son, and a Holy Ghost. Those are all aspects of a single deity, but that is what some people define as soft polytheism.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to find this question. There was a question on hard polytheism, and there's so many coming in that I'm a little bit struggling to keep track of all of them. Okay, I'll try and come back to it when I can find it. But moving to the U.S., somebody says, given what you said about the association of religions to empires being a strength, would you categorize what we have in the U.S. as an association of Protestantism with an empire?
Well, you know, again, what we have in the United States as a historical line going way back, I mean, basically, it's a westernization of the Americas. I mean, before 1492, things here were completely different. So I guess the question becomes, I guess that makes the question kind of confusing, because is the question, is Protestantism part of what makes this country strong? I'm not sure what the question is here.
Let me find it again. Sorry, one second. Okay, so given the association of religions to empires being a strength, would you categorize what we have in the U.S. as an association of Protestantism with an empire?
I'd say Christianity with an empire. Traditional Christianity with an empire. You might make a case for that. That's historical. I mean, that goes back to the founders. Yeah, it's true. Protestantism it came in with the founders, and I guess you could say that it's somehow connected to what I guess the questioner is implying is the American empire. I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so I found the hard polytheistic question. So somebody asks, what is the role or place of polytheism in the Asian cyclic religions like Hinduism and Buddhism as compared to the hard polytheistic religions? And do they differ in apparent function or reasons for emerging?
Yeah, that's why I separate old world hard polytheism from polytheism in Asian cyclicism. Again, because both of these branches go back so far that it still remains to be said, well, which one came first? And those early roots, I have no way of knowing. That's going to require study by, again, more historians who are specialists in those areas that, go way back. And I think we'll need more archaeological evidence too, because again, the further back you go in time, the more holes there are in whatever data you have. It's not unlike in biology, the further back in time, the fewer fossils you have, and you can't figure, at some point, the speculating goes way up. And that's going to be true here. If you're going back to the base of Asian cyclicism and the base of hard polytheism, old world hard polytheism, I have no idea which came first or whatever. But you don't need to know every branch. I mean, again, like I showed you, doing evolutionary work on anything, you only need 3 objects to begin with. I mean, we had the robin, the sparrow, and the frog. Okay, we can make an evolutionary tree with those 3 things without having to know all the other species. So with culture, with religions, we deal with the things we have, and the things we know first. And then if later somebody else finds more information for the base of these things, 10, 12,000 years ago, that can be added in. But figuring out historical relationships is a never-ending process. There's never a final word. All we're doing is we're building one tree at a time, and we keep splicing more and more trees together, and hopefully we keep learning more and more about the interrelationships of diversity that we're looking at.
So we have a question on how often do religions fail as compared to them evolving?
Well, it depends on what this person means by evolving. Again, we don't look at evolution as any kind of ladder of progress, if that's what they're referring to. We only look for group relationships based on these similar characteristics or written records of founders or whatever we have. And again, for one thing to evolve, that implies it's a linear sort of thing, which it really is not. I mean, again, all we can do is look at relationships. We have no way of really looking at one linear trajectory of something. I guess somebody, if they wanted to make a study based on historical, contemporaneous historical records, they might sit down and try and do that. I just see that having almost infinite possibilities, though. I don't see that being a very productive way to investigate any of this.
Okay, so we have a question from John. He says, does religion always require supernatural belief? At various times, religions have believed that important pillars were based on science, such as Greek philosophers.
Right. Religion becomes religion when it incorporates supernatural beliefs. If we're talking about science, I don't consider that to be a religion. I mean, science is empirical, so it's based on hypotheses and theories, but it doesn't tell you that this is the truth and you must believe it. I mean, science is a never-ending process of hypotheses, testing, falsification, and revising.
Okay, we have a couple of questions on kind of some of the terms that you've used. Mm-hmm. So a couple of people have asked about the term Abrahamic religions, if you can explain that a little bit.
Abrahamic religions, so I mean, it's today what we think of as Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then a number of extinct religions. It's a form of monotheism that, again, had a series of prophets they believed in, which included Abraham, who was thought to be kind of the earliest founder of all of this. So that's why it's called Abrahamic, because he's thought, at least as far as is known, he's thought to be the earliest sort of founder for it that we know of. That's not to say that there wasn't some guy somewhere that taught Abraham what he knew too, but we can only deal with the information that we have, and that's what our historical records indicate at this point.
Okay, so we have a couple of people that are trying to take away some general kind of themes from your talk and apply them to the present day. So somebody says, do you think your study of religions and your trees could be a unifying force to bring diverse religious groups together? Or do you think most religious leaders might reject your study because they see it as a threat to their power?
Well, those that see it as a threat to their power are not really looking for a way to understand, say, systems outside of their own. Again, what we have to do is make a better effort for broader understanding and some sort of pluralistic view of things, because again, That's not what's happening now. What's happening today is a very non-pluralistic way of looking at things, and this results in violence, misunderstanding. It's not going in a good direction right now. And I think unless we make an effort to more broadly understand aspects of culture as important as religion, we are not going to be able to deal with the modern problems arising today.
So Barbara says that she hopes she's paraphrasing you correctly in saying that there's a lesson for modern educators of the public generally that most all religions are related, more or less so, depending on how far back you go in time. So do you see this message as something to enlist religious leaders to teach people generally, and how might that be accomplished?
Well, I think the first step is, again, at least with people interested in history of religion studies, or social sciences, that we come back to a more pluralistic view of things, because we can't hope to understand belief systems outside of our own without some comparative basis. I know that there's this rejection of comparativism in the social sciences still today because of the way it was misused in the past, but that's not the way that, say, systematists use comparativism today. And in fact, with culture, I see that if there's any hope to have a broader understanding of systems outside of our own, we need to better understand the relationships as well as the differences here. And so I guess I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So we had another question on kind of common characteristics. So beyond human propensity towards religiosity, what common characteristics connect the earliest branching you describe, the cyclical generally in the East versus linear generally in the West views of time?
Well, certainly belief in there being, say, some good deities, some bad deities. Certainly the belief in something beyond the physical world. There are a number of very general characteristics like this, but of course they're also the hardest to define in some ways too. So that's why I use the most general connection I can, which is, again, the supernatural belief systems, because supernatural belief systems and organized belief systems, those two kind of traits unify both the Eastern and Western branches of organized religion.
Okay, we still have like 13 questions. We're getting through a lot and there are a bunch still coming in. So I'm going to keep trying to get through them. But okay, so next is, do you have any thoughts about the human drive to conceptualize supernatural systems, codify them, and organize around them? And that this continues to persist so powerfully to the present day. So given this, what would provide the broad push to overcome tribalism?
Well, again, they're two different things. Again, the desire for this spiritual connection, or whatever you want to call it, that is something that is kind of an innate characteristic of humans, it seems like. So I don't think that is going to change. Can you remind me again, what was the other part of the question?
What would provide a broad push to overcome tribalism?
Oh yeah, to overcome. Well, again, the only way you're going to overcome it is to understand those systems outside of your own. and develop a more pluralistic view of the world. I mean, we have to understand that if we don't do that, that it's going to cause some serious problems. It's already causing serious problems. Again, you just have to look around today what's going on. If you're looking to me for the final miraculous answer to how to fix all this, you're looking in the wrong direction. All I can do is identify the problem and ask that, maybe we search for a way that we can better develop a pluralistic attitude about our future as a species.
You mentioned in your third general observation that the role of women went down as the more organized religions kind of increased. Was there any point in time that you researched where the role of women was bigger?
Yes. The earliest artifacts we have that are interpreted as religious significance are mother goddess figures. They're called Venus figurines, and some of them are 20,000, 30,000 years old or more. They're carving of obvious female figures, and they're common, much more common than any carving of a male. And so it's hypothesized by some cultural anthropologists that these actually represented mother goddess figures. And then some of the earliest pantheons had very powerful mother goddess figures or female figures. Sometimes there was a goddess that was head of a pantheon. Mm. Now, as time went on, and in especially places like Rome, where you eventually had the formation of armies and male dominated political systems, the pantheons generally gradually followed that. So you had pretty soon you had a decrease in the number of goddesses. You had the supreme god was a male, and then pretty soon linear monotheism comes along, and you start with Aten, which is it's kind of unclear whether he's male or female, but it's always referred to as he. And then in Zoroastrianism, it's definitely a male god. And then in all the Abrahamic religions, the one god is always male. And then you look what happens with the clergies. Okay, you got a pope. The Islamic heads are male. It's that even that was a change, because the earliest forms of Christianity were not as male dominated, and neither was supposedly Islam. One of the most powerful figures in early Islam was Muhammad's wife. So I think over time, this has just kind of gradually happened. And nowadays it's pretty clear that males dominate the major religions of the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And with the trend of kind of having a major religion tied to an empire and that symbiotic relationship, are there any trends that you see of kind of formation of new religions or more fracturing since the Enlightenment era or any other era?
There's so many new flash religions happening today that, again, that's something that I didn't get into in any more detail than I had. I looked at hundreds of religions for this book, and as I say, there are the estimates today by Pew Research Center are there are 10,000 detailed religions today. So, and they're still coming and going. So again, that's another question for specialists. I talk about a few of the newer religions in my book, but only as examples. I nowhere near covered all the detailed new religions coming out. It was hard enough just getting the major groups of, say, a couple hundred religions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we've gotten a ton of people thanking you for your time and just finding it really, really interesting. So is there kind of one story or anecdote that you found during your research for this book that really just kind of, blew your mind or was completely different from what you had expected?
I guess I was just fascinated by the way that these things do have relationships through time. I mean, if you look at these things, they're often, a founder will come from a closely related religion, and he just makes a few changes. And again, the fact that you have all of these contemporaneous written records of diversification events, that's something that you never have in biology. In biology, you don't see contemporaneous records of speciation. That all happened, I mean, most of it all happened millions of years ago. So I think that historians have an opportunity here to develop an evolutionary context unlike we've never seen before, and I hope it can go in that direction.
We have a question from Elena, who asks if all of the research and the work that you did for this book influenced your own beliefs.
I think the one thing that they taught me is that we need to be open-minded. We can't assume that we know what the other is unless we've actually done a certain amount of study of it. It's so easy today to stick with those things we know and assume everything else is less consequential. And I think I think I learned that it was a good exercise for me personally. It taught me a lot about the diversity of human culture.
So like I mentioned earlier, we are recording this event and we will share it tomorrow with a link, as well as a link to the book with a discount code, which I'm sure everybody's going to go out and buy and read. But if there's any additional people that you find really interesting in this space, are there any podcasters, books, anything else that you think if they want to have more information about this topic, where can they go to find more?
Well, that's a really good question, because this is kind of a novel thing. I mean, there are a few people I mentioned in the book that are working with one particular group or another, but not really fleshing it out in terms of trees. This is something that I think what I'm hoping is this book is going to generate more of this kind of research. And I hope it does.
Well, maybe we'll have an alumni here on the call who can do that and start moving it forward. All right, we're in our last few minutes here, but I wanted to turn it over to you for any kind of last thoughts, overall thoughts, closing ideas for us tonight.
To me?
Yes.
Oh, close. Okay. Well, I guess I hope what everybody gets from this is that, it's important to us to develop a more pluralistic approach to things and start thinking about all the humans as our members of our tribe, because there's too much going on in the world today, which is pointing us in a bad direction. And we just need to figure out how to come together on a lot of this. And hopefully greater knowledge of relationships is a place to start. But we'll see. I can't say I know the final answer here, because again, that's part of the problem, is there are too many people that say they know the final answer. Trust me and you'll be saved. And I can't do that, and I refuse to do that here. I just encourage people to take a more pluralistic attitude and try and find out about things outside of their own backyard.
Well, I think that's a great place to end our conversation tonight. Thank you again so much. A bunch of people are saying thank you for your time. They really learned a lot. Again, thank you on behalf of the Columbia University Alumni Club of Washington, D.C., and all of our alumni here tonight. And thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Well, thank you so much.